You are listening to the Hiking Radio Network, where we talk the walk with shows by hikers, about hikers, for everybody.
Mighty Blue on the Appalachian Trail, the ultimate midlife crisis. Join Steve and his guests every week as he staggers from Georgia to Maine.
Hi everybody and welcome back to the show. And in case you don't know, this is Mighty Blue on the Appalachian Trail and I am Mighty Blue, or Steve Adams. Now, I'm pretty sure that a lot of you don't know why I'm Mighty Blue. I actually named myself before my 2014 thru-hiker of the AT after my perennially lousy soccer team in the UK. For some never explained reason, the fans of the team started referring to them as the Mighty Blues back in the 1990s. I've been going since the late 1950s. When I was thinking about my trail name, I was absolutely sure that I didn't want to be called England or Mr. Bean, so I opted for my beloved Mighty Blues, dropping the S at the end, and went with it. Well, you can hardly believe it, but one of the first people I met on the trail, on the approach trail up Springer Mountain to be precise, was Grizzly Bear of Maine, or Grizz. Guess what he insisted on calling me after he heard me speak? Yep, England. So I'm glad I chose that name. Sorry about the tangent there, but I've just been watching the Mighty Blues play a game, and they won. Happy days. Today we have a couple of interesting guests. The main guest is Dan Gosmeyer, or Shoeless. Dan and I met in 2019, and we shared each other's company for a few days before he zoomed off ahead of me. That he finished the trail was, from what I could see, a flipping miracle. He was on such a tight budget, but, well, he found a way. I wanted to catch up with Dan so that he could tell you how important determination and grit is on the trail. The best gear and all the stops in town won't get you there. Yet again, it's your attitude. Dan will be along soon. Our ATC guest today was going to be Morgan Somerville, yet I had an email from several of you this week drawing my attention to an article about the ATC, a pipeline, and $19.5 million. I can tell you it didn't read well, so I reached out to Sandy Mara, suggesting that airing it on my show would be of benefit to my listeners and the ATC. And do you know what? She agreed. And I was set up to interview Andrew Downs, Senior Regional Director for the ATC in Virginia. Andrew knows all about this stuff, and I had about, less than an hour to come up with something intelligible to ask him. I hope you like the result of my questions. Andrew will follow Dan. Finally, Larry Luxembourg's Walking the Appalachian Trail talks spirituality and how differently we all experience the trail. So let's get on with it. Here's Dan Gosmeyer, or Shoeless. When I hiked in 2019, I met a young guy who was quite quiet and whose name was Shoeless. Hey Shoeless, how are you?
I'm doing okay. How about yourself?
I'm not too bad, but that's not your real name, obviously. Your real name is Dan Gosmeyer. I should have introduced you as Dan Gosmeyer, but
That's all right.
Shoeless is such a great name, and it was so well earned. Tell us about how you were given that name. And it's pretty obvious that's what you'd be called, by the way.
Well, it started off, actually it didn't start off from why it stuck, but it started as me always going to camp, walking around barefoot at camp. So people started calling me Barefoot.
Right.
But as it went on, this was like earlier on, kind of near the top of Georgia hostel.
Right.
Just leaving Georgia, my shoes gave out on me. And I could either turn around.
That's a bit early, by the way. That's a bit early for your shoes to give out, isn't it?
Yeah, about 70 miles in. That's, I guess, what you get for trying to be cheap on your shoes. So
yeah.
maybe not my best choice to do that, but
Yeah.
It was probably maybe, I forget how many miles it was from top of Georgia shelter to Franklin, near Franklin. It's like, what, 30, 40 miles, something like that.
It's about 30 or 40 miles, yeah. So, and I saw somebody barefoot back when I hiked in 2014. So, and I often wondered, what's it like? Because it was damn cold then, wasn't it, as well?
Oh, yeah, it was very cold. I mean, the cold was probably the worst part of it. I mean, you just, things you step on, it doesn't compare to the cold, really. It wasn't really cold till that last day. That was when it was really, really cold. But fortunately for me,
And you were struggling with it then?
Fortunately for me, I ran to Dixie Wanderlust YouTuber. She actually gave me a ride into town to get me a pair of shoes, which was a lifesaver,
Very
really.
Cool. Yeah, I would think it probably was. and there was a reason that, I mean, you may or may not have, well, you mentioned already the fact that you were being a bit cheaper with your shoes. We met quite early on, and certainly before Hot Springs. You told me that you had a very, very limited budget, and I often wondered how you made out. And then you friended me on Facebook. I looked at your profile to see that you'd finished. And I must admit, when we last saw each other, which I think was in Hot Springs, it may have been soon after Hot Springs, I must be, I didn't think you were going to make it. But so how long did the hike actually take you?
Well, the actual hike took me about 4 months, but I stayed out an extra month to hike with another hiker who got injured on the trail, but she wanted to re-hike some miles. So me and another hiker decided to hike with her because she would be alone during like the bubble. You don't know what type of people would be on the trail then.
So you started, I mean, I started February, so you must have started around then as well. When did you actually start and when did you actually finish?
I think I started like early March 6th, I think, if I remember right.
Right.
I couldn't tell you when I ended, but 4 months.
Oh, really? You didn't know when you ended?
I knew when I did, but I forgot now.
That's amazing. Must have been early July then. Must have been.
Yeah, something like that.
Before we get on to why you were on the trail with the limited funds, what exactly was your budget for the trip? And did you need to finish quickly to make that budget work for you?
I had, honestly, I forget exactly what my budget was, but it was under $3,000, I believe. And I was trying to do under a couple hundred a month.
Under a couple of hundred a month?
I mean, the first month I actually managed to spend under like $300, but
wow.
As it went on, I started having problems like with my legs and whatnot, and I started spending more time in towns, and my budget was starting to come short. But fortunately, well, a lot of family, they all decided to step in and help me with the payments, so
that always helps.
I was able to stay out longer and enjoy it a bit more, which was nice.
Good. I mean, it was looking pretty tough for you, I've got to say, and a couple of hundred a month, couple of $100. So that meant you obviously stayed out of town a lot, and because when you go into town, you probably learned you hemorrhage money, don't you?
Yeah.
But how did you come to the AT in the first place? Had you been a hiker?
No, I've never hiked more than a couple miles, just doing a day hike with family. And I never went camping before in my life, unless you count sleeping out in the backyard at your grandma's house.
Yeah. Well, that's camping. So why did you think that the AT was the sort of thing you wanted to do then? I mean, you must have had it. You were working at the time. You're in your 20s, I guess.
Yeah. Well.
Yeah.
I was trying to get into the military for probably since I was 17, and I was like working towards that. And when it comes time to actually swear in, I failed the medical because of a peanut allergy. So I'm kind of stuck between.
You failed because of a peanut allergy? Oh my gosh.
Well, it was more the doctor prescribed me an EpiPen for the peanut, which is really what did it.
Right.
But
so was that a problem? Sorry, I don't want to interrupt you on that. I'll come back to the peanut allergy in a minute. So you failed because of peanut allergy. So where did that leave you?
Well, it just left me between, like, I don't know what I want to do. Do I want to go to college? Do I want to go to like trade school? I wasn't sure what I wanted to do with my life. And I'm at the point where I'm not married. I don't have kids. I'm not committed to anything. And I just got this idea, why don't I hike the Appalachian Trail? I mean, I've heard about it before, and I figured I'll just do that. And I think I came to that decision like in November that year, so I didn't have a lot of prepare time.
How did you imagine it would be then, Dan? I mean, what did you think the trail would be like? Did you read up about it to find out it was quite intense, or did you find out? Did you read up to find it could cost you a bit of money?
The money, people say you spend about $1,000 a month, and I figured, well, sure. I don't party, I don't drink or anything like that. I can do a lot cheaper than that. So I figured I have half of what I would need to do it. But I think I could do it. So that's what I went with. And
were you working? I know you tried to get into the military. Were you working prior to getting out on the trail?
Yeah, I was working a couple of part-time jobs, like at a restaurant, an orchard. I was helping some friends with various tasks.
So you were working, doing some work and raising your $3,000, hopefully to get out there.
Yeah.
And you must have heard of the adage that you should put your gear and your money on a bed, then take half the gear and twice the money.
Yeah.
How did you plan out? Yes, yeah. How did you plan out your time out there? Were you expecting to be in the woods for quite a period of time, so quite a long time between resupply?
My plan was to go a month without ever resupplying. So try to make like just 5 stops into towns as I went along, which was my plan, which doesn't make a lot of sense looking back on it, but that's what I was going for.
5 total stops into town.
Yeah. Like to figure
yeah,
out
that was never going to
work.
That was never going to yeah, that was always going to be tough. So when you realised on about day 3 that wasn't going to work, so how much food were you actually carrying with you when you set out?
I was carrying at least 3 weeks of food. I mean, it was a lot of stuff you shouldn't even be taking, like glass jars of coconut oil and things like that. Just a lot of things I really should not have been carrying with me.
So one thing about going on a hike like this, you learn pretty quickly, don't you? So how quickly did you realise that there might have been a bit of a flaw in your thinking in this?
Probably when I couldn't get my backpack on the second day. I had to have somebody help me put it on my back.
That's a bit of a clue, obviously, yeah.
Yeah.
So were you restricting how much food you were actually going to eat at a time, or did you, I mean, what was the plan? Because you know what it's like. You do get very hungry out there, don't you?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I had to figure out how much I would eat, how long it would last. But as much, I plan on eating more than I was actually eating. But when you first go out there, you just aren't hungry. I mean, later on, you eat like you'll never stop eating. But early on, you don't hardly eat a thing.
Yeah. So the logistics wasn't great to start with. I mean, we'll come back to that in a minute. But what advice were you able to get with regard to gear? Because as you say, 70 miles for a pair of shoes is probably not the way forward. So what did you get in terms of gear? Did you find things from different places?
As I went across the trail, I mean, as far as like when I first got a new pair of shoes, someone actually gave me a pair of shoes because their shoes, they got a different pair and they just gave me what they had, which that worked. And I kind of just saw what other people were doing and kind of copied them. Some people gave me some stuff. Someone gave me a hat, which I didn't have. And I lightened my pack to probably like 15 pounds from 60, which was nice over the course of the trail.
From 60?
There's a lot of things you don't really...
Do you mean you lightened it to 60 or by 60, from 60 to 15 or by 15 pounds? What do you mean you lightened it to?
Well, my pack was about 60 pounds when I started, and when I ended, I just had like 15 pounds. Oh, you literally dropped 45 pounds. Yeah, that's with food as well.
Have your pack. That is amazing. So that's funny. So what about tent or were you in a hammock? Well, I mean, I can't remember whether you were in a hammock or a tent.
I started with a hammock. I hardly ever used it, so I just got rid of it. I sent it home, and I just got a tarp.
Right.
I just did tarp camping, which I wouldn't recommend because those bugs they'll get you. I mean, you have a face mask. I mean, any exposed skin, they'll still get you, especially when you get to Vermont and Maine.
One of the wonderful things about your story, Dan, is that you took all this on board. It happened to you, yet you damn well finished, which is just amazing to me because, going with just a tarp and not covering your head. You had a sleeping bag, didn't you, and a sleeping pad?
Yeah. Actually, I didn't start with a sleeping pad. Someone also gave me that as well.
All right.
And that's one of those things you don't really need, but once you're out there, you do need a sleeping pad. It keeps in the heat.
You started a Springer, and did you do the approach trail, by the way?
No, I accidentally skipped it. My mom was dropping me off. We ended up in the middle of the woods, and she just dropped me off. We figured this was about the trail, so just like she was dropping off a stray dog in the woods.
Was that at the car park? Sort of, that's about 0.9 of a mile down from Springer.
I think so. I was meaning to go north from there, but I actually accidentally hiked south up to Springer, which I guess works. Like I said, I did the whole trail.
So you actually did touch the start sign. That must have been a surprise to you to find you were at the end of the trail already. You thought, this is a short trail.
But once I got to the top, I realized I should be going the other way. But that worked out.
Yeah. So, and was it physically challenging for you? Because you're a young guy, or did you find it that quite easy?
No, I really struggled. I mean, especially at the halfway point, because I really injured both my knees, and I was just lying on the side of the trail, really thinking I'm just gonna have to go home at Harper's Ferry, because I couldn't even support my own weight. I mean, I had to dump a bunch of food out of my pack and eat what I could, and I just limped down the mountainside. But fortunately for me, Fresh Ground was right there, and he helped me along the trail for a good chunk of it, really. Where if he wasn't there, I couldn't have finished it.
I was going to ask you about that. I didn't realize. So you met him around Harper's Ferry, did you?
Yeah.
Tell us about then why he meant so much to you, being able to finish your hike, because you were actually with him for quite some time, weren't you?
Yeah.
Or he was with you.
When we ran into him, my group and he pretty much brought our group together, where everybody in my group, we're a tramley. We just stuck together once Fresh Ground was there, and we just stuck together after he left, and we just bonded with each other. We just decided to finish the trail together as well.
Were they doing this on a similar budget to you as well?
Everybody was different, really. I mean, some people could splurge a little bit more than others. Others were about as tight as I was.
I never met anybody who told me that they were going on such a budget. I had loads of people say, I'm spending $2,000 a month. Loads of people were telling me that. And I think myself, poor old daddy. Yeah, I think you were expecting to do it in about 4.5 months. I think you told me your budget was just over $2,000 or $3,000, something like that. Anyway.
Yeah.
And so what were you doing to save money? Well, not going to town, obviously, and you obviously took your food with you, but that didn't work out. So you had to change that anyway, didn't you? You must have been running out of money by the time you met Fresh Ground.
Well, when we were at Fresh Ground, he was feeding us so much, we actually didn't have to buy as much food, which saved us a lot of money. So cool. That would be
very good. No wonder you hung around him.
Yeah, that would be a big reason. Another way, when you have like 8 people, staying at hotels pretty cheap that way.
So you'd all pile into one room?
When the whole group was together, sometimes we get 2 rooms, but still at like 4 or 5 people in one room, you aren't paying that much money. Yeah, full night's sleep is always nice.
Because hiking with 8 people is quite a commitment one way or the other, isn't it? Some are faster than others, some are slower than others. You generally around each other and slept most nights with each other, or
our group, we've split up so many times. I mean, there's only, you count on your fingers how many days we were probably all actually together. But we generally tried to hike with each other. But getting used to being with people, because I'm more of a loner kind of a guy. I prefer to be by myself, but I just came to really enjoy these people's company.
That's what I was wondering, because I remember you telling me when we did meet that you quite like being by yourself. You enjoyed the solitude of the trail, and then you say you hiked with 8 people at some stage. So how did you make that transition? Yeah, because you're quite a quiet guy, but did you find yourself getting into that whole community thing?
No, not really. I mean, I like to be with these people, a lot of times I just try to get by myself or hike ahead of them, let them hike ahead, or just try to get alone time. But it was always nice just to be with everybody at the end of the day, really.
I agree. The end of the day, it's one of the things that I think a lot of the hikers last year and this year are probably going to miss, because they can't congregate too close to each other. Yeah. Well, they can, I suppose, but they shouldn't congregate too close to each other on the trail. And this is something we never had to worry about, did we? When we went
I can't imagine what it was like last year.
Oh yeah, we were lucky we went in 2019, no question.
Yeah.
So coming back to your hurt knee, was it obviously the weight of the pack that was doing that? Did you find, obviously, as you lightened your pack, that really started helping you as well?
Yeah, I believe that was the main thing that I did, was the heavy pack. I started with a bad knee to start with, because I also broke my toe early for that year before I hiked, and I don't know. I think I hurt my knee just from that, and then going from trail right after recovering from my toe just
I got to tell you, Dan. I got to tell you, Dan. If you line people up in you think when you meet them in a shelter the first night or second night, we always used to make judgments on other people, and we thought, well, that they won't do it, or they'll do it. They're easily going to do it. They won't do it. You've proven the fact that you can be unprepared, you can have little money, and yet it's determination that keeps you going. Was it a mental battle for you out there, or did you find that part of it quite easy?
Every day I had to tell myself I just have to keep going. I mean, every day I wanted to quit. Well, that's not entirely true. Near the end, I was actually enjoying it out there. Then I wanted to stay out. Now I'm almost done.
Right.
But early on it's just stubbornness to keep myself out there.
So why didn't you quit then? I mean, why didn't you just stop and go home?
I'm not even sure, honestly. I mean, I guess I just wanted to finish it. I started it, and I didn't want to go home as a quitter, I guess. I don't know. Sometimes I think I just worry too much what other people think of me, and maybe that's a good thing or a bad thing. I'm not sure.
Yeah, I don't give a crap what anybody else thinks about me, but then I never have. And in my 68 years, I don't care. Frankly, they can like me or don't like me. It's up to them. Their opinion of me is not my problem.
Yeah.
So you kept going despite through the pain and so on. So how did the knee start improving as time went on then? Because you said, I know what knees, when you get a bad knee, it damn well hurts. Did you start taking ibuprofen or a knee?
I did the one day I was up when I first heard it. I took 2, but actually after that I never touched it again because
wow.
I figure if it hurts too much that you have to take pain pills, you shouldn't even be on the trail. But that's kind of my little philosophy. If you can't move because it hurts, don't take pain pills. Just change what you're doing.
I took 2 for breakfast, 2 for lunch every day. Because if it didn't hurt, if it hurt or not, because I knew it was going to hurt. So I thought I'd preempt the pain. So finishing in 4 months, you must have been really kind of moving towards the end. How long did it take you to get through the 100-mile wilderness? And did you enjoy that?
It didn't take us long. I mean, it was kind of just smooth for us. Really, it was. Most of the people in my group, they wanted to just hike it all like in one go. I mean, they got about 50 miles and then they just hiked the last of it all together. But me and these 2 other people, they were injured or hurt, so I just kind of moved slow with them.
Yeah,
and we just kind of trudged along and got through it.
And there you are. You're at Abel Bridge. You can see Katahdin, so you're going to make it by then.
Oh yeah.
So my Katahdin day, as everybody on the show knows, was epic for me anyway. It may not have been for them, but it was for me. So tell us about yours. Was it an epic day for you, or was it just another day on the trail?
It was very underwhelming. All through the trail, I'm thinking this is going to be a great experience, but once I get up there, it was just another day.
Wow.
I didn't feel like it was anything special.
Wow. I don't know how you can do that. I don't know how you can feel that way about it.
Well, I felt like I had my own little experience later on because we took a ride back south a little bit, hiked those miles again, and I met the guy who gave me my trail name. And it was just really nice to see him because he really helped me a lot early on in the trail. And to see him again before I finished or went home, it was a really great experience.
I'm sure. So you touched the brown sign, and it was like, is that it? or do you think, were you glad it was over?
Yeah.
Were you pretty much glad it was over, were you?
No, like I said, I wanted to stay out there now. At that point, I wanted to re-hike those miles with these other 2 hikers, and
right.
I don't know, just didn't feel like the end for me, I guess, because of that, because that's where they plan staying out an extra month or so.
So where did you go back to then?
We re-hiked parts of, Pennsylvania, New Jersey, New York. probably the worst states to rehike.
Yeah, good choice. Good choice. How are your shoes by then, by the way? And by the way, I meant to ask you, how many shoes did you get through on the trail?
Have you put just 4? I still have the ones I finished with.
Not bad. Not too bad at all. So you went back to Pennsylvania, New Jersey, New York, crazy. So when did you actually finish your hike on the trail? Was that person you were with filling in some miles they hadn't done?
Yeah, she got hurt on the trail, so she was actually hanging out with Fresh Ground for a month, and she just rejoined our group once she recovered. So me and another guy, we hiked with her back north. So
you finished, you went home. How did post-trail life hit you?
It's depressing, really. I mean, besides not being able to move because everything was sore for a good couple of weeks or months after that.
You're in my age, mate.
Trying to find something to do. I figured while I was on the trail, I was going to figure out what I want to do with my life. But that didn't really happen. So once I got off the trail, I had to quickly figure something out. So I ended up with truck driving.
Right.
Which is kind of a similar life, more or less. You plan out where you're going, plan out your stops, cover your miles, live in kind of a dumpy kind of a situation.
But do you miss the trail?
I do, actually.
Do you?
Well, I would like to do it again, but I don't think I ever will.
I never thought I would as well. When I finished in 2014, I said I'd never bloody hike again, and I did it the year we met. So what do you miss most about the trip? I'm going to ask you about the bet. What do you miss the most, and what do you miss the least? Firstly, what do you miss the most about the trail?
I miss the people, the conversation, the just the camaraderie. Or where everybody's willing to help you, everybody's nice. It's really just the kindness of strangers, I would have to say, is the thing I miss the most. Kindness
of strangers is humbling, isn't it, sometimes? Especially, and my experience of being on the trail is how kind people are when you're out there. So what do you miss the least? What do you miss the least?
The bugs. It has to be the bugs. I can't stand the bugs. They were awful.
And they are endless, aren't they? They're just literally endless and relentless. Did you have a bug net?
I did, but even if it's just flush against your skin, they'll still get you. But me and other guy, he was also tarp camping. We try to come up with some clever ways to try to keep these bugs off us.
So if you did do it again, I mean, I suppose the question is predicated a lot along the other question that do you feel you missed out on much of the trail because of the lack of funds? And if you do feel that's the case, then how would you do it differently next time if you were to do it?
Well, if I didn't have to worry about funds or anything, I would certainly take my time a lot more. I would see more of the sites, spend more time, just hike slower, take your time, go see things, stick with the people you want to stick around, really.
Yeah, I'm sure.
Because there's a lot of people I would have liked to keep hiking with, but I ended up hiking ahead of them.
Yeah. So do you think you'll ever do another long trail? And if you did, would you do the AT again, or would you try one of the other ones, the PCT or the CDT?
If I were to do another long one, I wouldn't do the AT again. I would do either the PCT or the CDT. And
one last thing, which I think is, I mean, I admire you, by the way, for doing it. This must have been, for me, I couldn't have done it like you. I actually spent, I think, something like over $20,000 on the trail, which is ridiculous. I mean, which I didn't. Which I've got to tell you, by the way, I didn't have either. but I did spend it because I wanted to make sure I was reasonably comfortable. And I was reasonably comfortable most of the time. So. And this is important for people because I know a lot of people think themselves they can't afford to go out there, but you've done it on a very limited budget. So since you have come home, I'm sure people must have asked you about it. What advice do you give people, or could you offer people who need to take on that hike on a limited budget? How would you say your experience has informed you, and you could help people that give them some idea how they could do it on a limited budget?
Well, for one, you don't need all the best gear. I mean, I was cheap on pretty much everything. I mean, I didn't spend a lot of money on a backpack or sleeping bag or sleeping pad, or shoes. which was a mistake. I would recommend getting good shoes. I mean, be smart with like your food choices. Really just try to stay away from like hotels and things like that, or, you know, you can be reasonably comfortable staying in shelters or tenting. There's cheap places to stay in towns as well, but you can be reasonably cheap about where you stay if you need to go into town.
Yeah. So when you look back on the trail, do you look back on it with a fondness, or do you look back on it thinking, oh my God, that was hard work?
It's always a fondness. Even like the worst of things, those are like some of the best memories. I mean, it sucked at the time, but looking back on it was some of the best time you ever had. Yeah,
I agree. I think in my case, somebody who's never hiked before, in your case, somebody who's never hiked before, you find something within you out there that you just didn't know you had, and the capability to carry on. I mean, I've talked about hiking again in 2020 or 2021 this year, which I'm not going to now. But when I thought about it, I thought to myself, why are you putting yourself through this again? Why do you even consider putting yourself through this again? And I think it's because what you said is the community out there and the people who are just nice to hang around with, aren't they?
Yes.
Well, look, lovely to talk to you, Dan. As I say, I admired the fact that you kept at it, because you didn't look like, you wouldn't have been a strong favourite of mine that you were going to finish it, but you did. So, you know, you certainly proved me wrong, and my hat's off to you, and I appreciate you coming on and tell us about it. Okay.
Thanks for having me on.
Okay, man. Will you take it easy and stay well? And if you do another long distance hike sometime, just let me know.
Sure, I will do.
Okay, mate. Cheers. Bye.
Bye.
So, he had a peanut allergy, and that eventually led him to the trail. I've heard of worse reasons, and he planned to stop just 5 times on the trail. But as we always find, people adapt terribly quickly. I used to say to people, if you do something stupid on the trail, just don't do that again. And Dan even dropped 45 pounds in weight from his pack. 60 down to 15. That's amazing. He had no money. He had no preparation. He had bad gear, yet he found a way. If you ever needed proof that inexperience is no barrier to a successful hike, then Dan is certainly somebody to point to. It was great to catch up with him as well. Thanks, as always, go to this week's donors supporting our shows on the network. This week, 3 of our monthly champions came through once again: Lisa Rana, Erskine Bass and Brian Helton Jr. Thank you guys, you know how much it means to me. If you'd like to support the show, then just go to the hikingradionetwork.com website and click on one of the many donate buttons on each of our shows. Thanks again. Oh, and one more thing before we move on. You've got to pay attention here. You may recall that I used to use mightyblueontheat.com as the website for this podcast. And some of you may know that I also used to use steveadams.info as the website for my books. Neither site has been updated for a while. In fact, if you go to those pages now, you'll see a blank white sheet. So going forward, the podcasting is all going to go through Hiking Radio Network, while I'm also working, somewhat sporadically it must be said, on a new authors site. Those older sites have now been closed down effectively, and I'll be phasing out the email addresses steve@mightyblueontheat.com and steve@steveadams.info. Going forward, anything to do with the podcast should be addressed to steve@hikingradionetwork.com. And should you want a copy of my free ebook, Hiking the Appalachian Trail is Easy, especially if you've never hiked before, drop me a line to steve@steveadamsauthor.com and I'll write back to you with the link. I hope that makes sense, and I may have to mention it again going forward. We'll see. Now, ATC. Like many of you, I've read a lot of bloviating this week, especially on Facebook, about how terrible the ATC is for selling out on their environmental responsibilities. As you'd imagine, the truth is far more nuanced than the feeding frenzy over the article that appeared last week. I wanted to find out more, and without a beat, ATC put me in touch with somebody who could answer all my questions. Here's Andrew Downs. We were originally going to be spending today's interview with the ATC talking to somebody else, but in light of an article I was sent from a few listeners this week regarding the Mountain Valley Pipeline, I requested from the ATC somebody could talk to the contents of the article. So today we have Andrew Downs, Senior Regional Director of the ATC in Virginia, and somebody who knows about the subject. Hey, Andrew, how are you?
I'm doing great. How are you?
I'm good, thanks. Firstly, thanks for coming onto the podcast to talk about this, but I had about an hour's notice. So I've been cramming for the last hour or so to get up to speed with this. So please forgive my somewhat scattergun approach. I want to avoid some of the hyperventilating going on over at Facebook. But before I do, I want to let listeners hear what I read on the homepage of ATC's website this morning. Two headings that really stuck out for me. And one was a quote from Benton Mackay about, and it was saying how Benton Mackay's call for protecting the oxygen in the mountain air along the Appalachian skyline guides our work in combating climate change in the AT. The number two was, the other heading was overseeing the management and conservation of the Appalachian National Scenic Trail since 1925. And the mission of the Appalachian Trail Conservancy is to protect, manage and advocate for the Appalachian National Scenic Trail. Now, Andrew, with that context in mind, let's turn to the deal that was announced on the ATC site back in August last year. And you can tell us about that, I'm sure, but it says basically the Appalachian Trail Conservancy, the Conservation Fund and the Mountain Valley Pipeline announced a shared commitment to conservation stewardship. Can you tell us, in words that somebody like me can understand, can you tell us what the deal is actually about?
Yeah, I think in general, the deal reflects the Appalachian Trail Conservancy's need to address issues around the pipeline. Sure. Even if we had voted to oppose it. You know, we didn't like the pipeline. Our board voted to oppose it, I think, in 2016. But that doesn't absolve us for a responsibility to deal with its impacts and its effect on the landscape. Of course. And so this agreement, I think one reflects standard operating procedure for ATC in that our goal working with people developing roads, power lines, pipelines, I mean, there are almost 60 pipelines across the AT now, there's hundreds of power lines, has always been to work with the developers to ensure or to work towards hopefully win-win solutions so we could minimize or avoid impacts to the trail, and so whoever is building a power line or something can do that in a responsible way. So that's always our goal. I mean, I've worked on a number of power lines and pipeline projects, and we want to work as closely as we can with these developers because a big project can have a very small impact if done responsibly, and a small project could have a really big negative impact to the AT.
I'm sure, yeah. And I saw actually a picture of you at a spot somewhere on another pipeline, the Atlantic Coast Pipeline, which ATC neither supported nor opposed.
Correct.
And the reasons behind that was you didn't feel, as I understand it from the article I read, was that it would necessarily impact the AT in any substantive way. So you were kind of working with them to make sure that everyone's protected. Okay, so that's kind of still got issues with it anyway. Mm-hmm. And so we may even come back to that later, I'm not sure. But let's just establish a few facts then. So you did oppose, as an organisation, before this deal was signed, the proposal to dig under the AT for I think it's a 303-mile natural gas pipeline. Is that right?
Yep, that's right. I think 2015, 2016, I should know the date offhand, but yeah, our board voted to oppose it.
And what form did that opposition take?
We primarily through our filings and participation in the federal regulatory process. So the Forest Service in this case has oversight and permit authority along with the Bureau of Land Management because the pipeline is so big, but really the Forest Service. So we tried to affect that change around the pipeline by, pointing out problems to the Forest Service, filing issues with the Forest Service relative to the AT. And there were a lot back then. I mean, in 2016, I think the original draft environmental impact statement didn't have a single picture of what impacts might look like from the trail. And it was really a big part of our opposition was based on the lack of information available to the public around impacts to the trail.
And yet, after the opposition, you made this announcement last August that they were going to donate $19.5 million for for ATC to use on conservation efforts. I mean, that sounds great, obviously. But unfortunately, I then read further down the page. It was talking about the Mountain Valley Pipeline, about it's a proposed underground interstate natural gas pipeline, blah 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 blah. From planning and development to construction and in-service operation, MVP is dedicated to the safety of its communities, employees, and contractors, and to the preservation and protection of the environment. But I mean, they've already been fined several times about erosion. Erosion has developed about this. So that always rings hollow when you hear that sort of stuff. So what was the thought process that allowed ATC to withdraw their opposition? Please don't tell me it was because they gave you $19.5 million.
Sorry to laugh. No. And I wouldn't say it's not necessarily withdrawing opposition. What it is recognizing that between the time that ATC voted to oppose this and the time that we chose to engage with MVP in a possible agreement, one massive thing changed, which is most of the pipeline got put into the ground.
That's right.
The impacts that were the foundation of our opposition happened. All that happened. And so we were left in a situation where it's like, all right, well, all the things that we didn't want to happen happened, and as a result, there was outcomes for the landscape that we didn't like. What do we do at this point? What's the best outcome for the trail at this point? Now with hundreds of miles of pipe in the ground, now with this visual impact, now with impacts to local communities. What's the best decision at this point for the trail? And at that point, again, it's worth repeating, a lot of the pipeline was already in the ground. The courts, the Fourth Circuit Court, had already said that the analysis of impacts to the trail had been sufficient, right? That the permit requirements relative to the AT had been met. The Fourth Circuit already said that. So then Mountain Valley came to us and said, well, we want to try and do some good here. And we think because the Appalachian Trail is such a focal point on the landscape to all these communities, helping the Appalachian Trail would go a long way to helping everybody surrounding this. We felt that it was the best course of action to listen to them when they came, given the situation on the ground at that time.
So you listen to them, and I think the issue they still have to address, or all these pipelines have to address, is the ability to drill or put pipelines underneath federally owned land, isn't it? And unless I got confused with this article that I was reading earlier on, apparently there's a Supreme Court ruling, or was a Supreme Court ruling in the last couple of days, regarding whether they can go underneath federally owned land. Is that an issue that you know more about?
No, you almost got it. They can go under federal land.
Right.
All federal land is not managed the same. Forest Service, BLM, Park Service, Fish and Wildlife. It's all different. All the permitting processes are different. Some lands they can go under, like Forest Service land. Other properties they can't, like Park Service land. The AT is a conglomerate of a bunch of different ownerships, all unified by one idea, right? That idea being the AT, and that's ATC's role as steward of that concept. And so I don't know how many, there's a ton of pipelines on Forest Service land. I mean, the Forest Service is a multiple use mandate agency. So it's not necessarily, in the Supreme Court case, the issue was, who has permit authority when crossing the AT on Forest Service land.
Interesting.
But around the Mountain Valley pipeline, that has been much less of a question. I mean, in the opposition to Mountain Valley, the lawyers who took that pipeline to court and won back in the Fourth Circuit in the ruling I mentioned, didn't even bring that issue to bear in their lawsuit. So it hasn't been an issue with Mountain Valley.
Okay, but were the impacts being in your opposition to this being built, and it was continuing to be built? It was obviously making progress. Was it actually impacting the AT as we were seeing it ourselves? In other words, what really were the practical differences the hikers were seeing before this became an issue, before you actually did this deal? What was hikers actually coming across that they could see impacts from this pipeline?
There's a number of locations where they would, a beautiful view. I think Rice Field, north of Pearisburg,
right,
is probably one of the places where the pipeline corridor would be most visible.
Right.
So things like that.
Okay. So you did the deal, and it was up to $19.5 million. Can you tell us, have you received that money? And is there a certain, is it contingent upon anything happening? Because I'm not sure how that comes across in any of the articles. We don't really know what the state of that is.
We've received some of the money. The money is tied.
10 million? 15?
Yeah, I think about 10.
Okay. Fine. Right.
And the reason I don't have the specifics, I just don't have the accounting in front of me. But
Sure.
it is tied to project goals, like project development. So as the project moves forward, and further impacts the trail, and continues to progress, then future tranches of money will be delivered to ATC.
So effectively, the fulfillment of the deal is predicated around you not opposing it anymore. Is that correct?
No, it's not. It doesn't affect our opposition. I mean, ATC still remains fully able to engage in the process and talk about the pipeline as we have in the past. What the deal is focused on ATC's, the Appalachian Trail specifically, the Appalachian Trail's ability to be a positive force across this landscape. And the pipeline company and ATC and the Conservation Fund felt that this part of the landscape needed a positive force, in part because of the impacts relative to this pipeline. And so we, stood up and said, we will be an agent, or we'll be the responsible party to apply that positive force, that money across the landscape in a beneficial way.
But can you see, and by the way, and listeners need to know, this is not a politician. I'm looking at a hairy dude who is an AT hiker. This is a guy who loves the AT, and he's the man, as he said to me, their job is to protect the AT. So I'm not talking with a bureaucrat here. I'm talking to somebody who is actually loves the AT. And I think it's kind of important to say that, by the way, because one of the things about being a director on a non-profit board, which I am, is the duty of a director is to ensure the public trust. And while Facebook, as everybody knows, is a nightmare, I'm not sure the public trust is necessarily being at least appreciated in the last week or so regarding this article. And of course, people then go off on tangents and fall down all sorts of different rabbit holes, Sure. I mean, you never know where that's going to end. So why was there such a reluctance to answer questions initially from the journalist who wrote the story on February the 5th? I know it's only a few days later, but they weren't getting their questions asked. And the reason I say that, I've just asked you exactly the questions they were asking. You've answered them.
Yeah. So that reporter didn't contact me. Right.
All right. Okay.
So I don't know
right.
and I was in the field. I was down in Damascus looking at the new trail center in Damascus, which is almost done. This is going to be awesome.
Cool.
But my understanding was that, and we've answered a ton of questions about this, and will continue to do so. I mean, if the public trust is important, as you said. If the reporter contacted us on Friday, and the article was going to go out Friday.
Sure. Yeah, the 5th, yeah.
There's not a ton of time to have a conversation about a really complicated issue, right?
You must have known it's been an issue since August last year. You must have known it.
Oh yeah, but we've talked to lots of reporters since then. I mean, the
couldn't find that stuff.
check out Lawrence Hammock's work at the Roanoke Times. He's a really good reporter and a really transparent news organization.
Okay, well, I'll try to do it. I say I only had an hour, so I'm trying to work these things out. So, what is the normal? And I think it's the. Is there a disclosure, or I think the concern is more about whether or not it's contingent upon your opposition. You're saying you still got the right to oppose it. You're trying to make the best of it. So let's move forward a sec. Let's say the whole thing gets done 100%. Okay, God bless them. You get your $19.5 million, but you spend that money to reduce the impacts in the best way you can.
Well, hold on. It's not to. This is a key point. It's not to reduce the impacts. There's a recognition, right, that this thing is impacting the landscape in a very broad, very general way, and the goal is to kind of be a rising tide to help communities, to preserve the AT, because the AT is a financial engine for a lot of these corporations or a lot of these towns and things like that. So AT gets better, everybody gets better. We need to get better, right? But there's a different process for this particular impact to the trail, causes this, degradation of the experience and needs to be addressed by, like the drilling, for example. If we need to determine if hikers will be able to hear the drilling. If they need to put up sound barricades or something like that. Those are really impact-driven conversations. Those are still ongoing, right, as part of the permit and regulatory process, and ATC will stay involved in those. The voluntary stewardship agreement is not about addressing specific impacts. It's about the AT's ability to be a positive force across all these communities, and MVP's desire to support a positive force on the landscape at this scale.
Okay, excuse my my naive skepticism here, or cynicism. That it's a multi-billions dollar project, and they're prepared to pay fines for screwing up. So how do you see the AT looking like once this is done, which it obviously will be done, or probably will be done now? Once this happens, what will I, if I hiked the AT in 4 years' time, what would I see that was different?
Well, you'd be able to see the pipeline corridor, first of all, right? That's different in a couple places. But you would also... And
it's underground, by the way, it's underground, isn't it? So we see, like in much the same way when we cross through out of a forest, pass under a power line, which is ugly. So we see that anyway. So this is a pipeline which will cause everything underneath it to just be grass over it, or whatever it's going to be.
No, it's going to be drilled under the trail, so the trees and everything on the surface where the trail is will remain. Right. So it's going to be a 630-something foot bore, so 315 feet off either side of the trail. They're going to start a drill, right, and go through. So you would see the pipeline corridor in the distance as it approaches those drill locations, right? A sort of unnatural kind of linear thing looks, it looks different than anything else because of the nature of pipeline construction. So you would be able to see that, and that's definitely a negative. On the other side, after the application of these funds, a lot of the places in Central Virginia that are underprotected, right? Places like McAfee Knob, places like Burke's Garden and Chestnut Ridge, places, there's right around Parisburg. There's threats to these places through development, through timber, through all sorts of stuff every day. What you won't see in 5 years is a new apartment complex at one of these properties next to the trail.
They could do more about Chestnut Knob Shelter, by the way. It's looking a bit rugged these days.
I like that spot, though. That view down into Burke's Garden is amazing.
Yeah, fantastic stuff.
But, there are a couple places right in there where somebody could go throw up put up whatever they wanted. Whether it's a cell tower or a 7-Eleven. It's private land right there. So what you won't see after the application of these funds is that 7-Eleven or that impact right there. And that's difficult sometimes for people to walk the landscape and understand, because it even if it's private land, if it's undeveloped, it looks just like a national park countryside would, or something like
absolutely.
that. But the reality is this section of the AT in Central Virginia, like I said, is vastly underprotected And this allows us to build out protections that are more appropriate for the Appalachian National Scenic Trail.
Okay, but I'll tell you what, firstly, I appreciate you agreeing to come and chat about this. And I think this openness really does help ensure the public trust. And I don't know how people will think about it, but hopefully they'll be grateful for it. I just want to finish with one last question. You as a hiker, as I've said to everybody, big bearded dude, so he's obviously a real hiker. Do you think that those two headlines I read right at the very beginning, are they consistent with the approach of the ATC over this agreement, do you think?
Absolutely. I mean, and you got to understand that at the beginning, this isn't necessarily where we wanted to end up.
Absolutely.
This is a recognition that to get the AT, to preserve the oxygen for the AT that Benton talked about, you've got to make some tough decisions. Everything doesn't always go in your way. I mean,
sure.
It's a 2,000-mile long corridor, pipelines, power lines, development, roads, every single day. And so what you've got to do is take every opportunity you can to make lemonade. You know what I mean?
Okay. Well, I take that well. Basically, in my British way, I guess I'd boil it down to you can bitch and moan about it as much as you like, but if you'd just done that, you would have been $19.5 million short, and you couldn't have done the things you're going to be doing with that money anyway.
And
so I'm
still
glad
have the impact.
Exactly. I understand that. Okay, man. Well, I appreciate you coming on, and thanks for talking to us about it.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Cheers, man. Bye.
Bye.
Well, what do you think? The cynic in me believes that those of you who had already made up your mind, well, nothing Andrew could say would change that. But if you listened to this passionate guy and you understood at the very least where he was coming from, then ATC had provided plenty of rationale for you to consider. It struck me that we're always going to be battling with the man, but I can take from my chat with Andrew that ATC are continuing to fight the fight, choosing their battles and their rewards strategically. You may totally disagree, and I'd love to know what you think. Email me at steve@hikingradionetwork.com with your opinion, or better yet, click on the microphone button on our website and send me a 2-minute voicemail. Let's have it out in the open, and if I need to, I'll have Andrew back on to answer all of your questions. A dialogue is so much better than just cyberbullying from a place of ignorance. By the way, I've added links in the show notes of other times that the story has been in the press, so take the time to read them and draw your own conclusions. Just before we get on to Larry Luxemburg's book, I made the drawing for Tina Tempest's handmade Appalachian Trail necklace on Wednesday. For those of you who have entered, thanks for taking part and coming up with the right answer, which was, by the way, the Piedmont Appalachian Trail Hikers, or PATH. The winner was John Geeson, and I've already emailed him to ask for his address. When I get that, the necklace will be on its way. Well done, John, and thanks for everybody for joining in. And thanks also to Tina for letting us do this. I wear my necklace every day, and I always look at the states represented on the necklace, and kind of takes me back sometimes. It really resonates with me. Larry Luxemburg's Walking the Appalachian Trail finishes us off today with Larry looking into the things that people find or take away from the trail that their normal lives may not have given them. It happened to me too. I'll see you next week. Second wind. Spiritual awakenings and the pull of nature. I never knew a man go for an honest day's walk for whatever distance, great or small, and not have his reward in the repossession of his own soul. G.M. Trevelyan. Not everyone comes back from the trail more inclined to worship indoors, but many hikers do return with a greater sense of divine presence and an increased faith in the essential goodness of mankind. Roby Jumpstart Hensley wrote in his journal about reaching the top of Moose Mountain in New Hampshire. I found a grassy place on the top of a flat rock with a view to the west. I ate supper and watched the loveliest sunset I've seen in a long time. How could anyone enjoy all this beauty and not feel a reverence for its creator? A few days later, he added, Sunday morning and I hear church bells. Somehow I feel God's presence more out here on the trail than I ever did in a church. The Appalachian Trail brings a hiker to the tops of hundreds of mountains in all kinds of weather. It's a hardy soul indeed who can stand on the summit of Mount Washington or Katahdin in a thunderstorm and not make at least preliminary inquiries about the availability of some form of outside intervention. Jan Sacagawea Collins remembers reading a story on bird migration. They think some birds navigate by hearing the low-frequency sounds from massive objects like mountains and the ocean. That said to me that the mountains sing, they speak to us. People have long believed that mountains can inspire and heal us. Recently, a branch of psychology has sprung up called eco-psychology. It examines the ties between people and nature and tries to use that to help people. To Benton Mackay, this would have fit nicely with one of his original reasons why the AT should exist, to serve as a retreat for urban people caught up in the frenetic pace of daily life. Living intimately with nature for 5 or 6 months, thru-hikers touch parts of their inner selves that they often didn't know existed. None of this is a new discovery. People have long treated the mountains with respect. The Abenaki Indians in Maine were watchful of Pamola. The Chinese greatly esteemed the magical landscapes of Guilin. Taoists encouraged their holy men to live among the mountains. Buddhists established monasteries on holy mountains in China. In Japan, there has long been a traditional mountain religion. In urban America, on the other hand, mountains are too often just something to admire on postcards or from car windows. Alan Gassau, an artist and conservationist who was the keynote speaker at the 1983 ATC meeting, wrote several columns for the AT News trying to define his concept of a sense of place. He believes that nature has healing powers and that certain places are special to us because of our past associations. He said that people need rootedness so that our special places can provide spiritual and health benefits. In modern America, however, people have too often lost their sense of community. He cited the AT as an example of what he hoped would become more common. He understood that this mingling of private pleasures, each individual's own sense of place, coupled with the body memory of shared work of building and caring together, has, in the end, led to the creation of something greater than any individual experience, greater than any part. What has been created, in the truest sense, is a spiritual path. Not surprisingly, Gassau believes that nature is a tonic for harried people. Given the cost of medical care, I wonder if a return to landscapes as healers might turn out to be more productive of bodily and spiritual improvement. Describing his family vacation retreat off the coast of Maine, he wrote, "I know of no drug, no hospital procedure that produces the same deep euphoria as a week on this small Atlantic island. Nature is restorative precisely because it enlivens all of our senses, thereby reminding us what it means to be fully human." Gassau believed in the importance of staying in touch with childhood innocence, vigour and fantasy. As adults, nature heals by reminding us in a bodily sense what it was like to be a child. He went on to say that nature heals because it slows us down and encourages us to use our bodies. Gassau quoted painter Thomas Cole's letter to Asher Durand. "You sit, I know you do, in a close, airtight room, toiling, stagnating and breeding dissatisfaction at all you do. When, if you had the untainted breeze to breathe, your body would be invigorated, your spirits buoyant, and your pictures would even charm yourself." Reinforced in the appreciation of nature may be the body's basic circadian rhythms, which influence, among other things, sleep and energy levels. Civilized life, which is increasingly detached from the natural world, mutes these forces. Dr. William N. Gorge noted in a column in the AT News that good sleeping is encouraged by a day's physical work, and a relaxed mind and sound sleep promote good circadian rhythms. Most people undertaking a wilderness experience describe a gratifying sense of inner contentment and well-being, a sharpening of the senses and an improved outlook on life. Could it be that this sense of emotional and physical well-being is due, at least in part, to the inner harmony of our many biological rhythms with the natural rhythm of our world? I think so. Bob Sweetpea-Lafoot Hill, who hiked the trail in 1977 after leaving the Marines, said, "Because of the trail, I'm more spiritual, more in tune with nature and my surroundings and other people. I have a greater awareness of the joys of the simple things in life. I can't imagine what my life would be like if I hadn't done the trail. Life would seem pretty empty without it. There's not a day that passes that I don't think of the trail." He adds, "I'll never forget the quietness, the feeling of well-being physically and spiritually, the people who treat you with generosity. It's an adventure of the soul, something to nurture the soul," said Offshore Steve Gomez, who hiked the trail in 1986. "The trail was the start of a big change in my life. It was the beginning of listening to my heart more than what other people's expectations of me were. For Steve, who was a commercial fisherman from ages 19 to 27, the trail rejuvenated him. I felt at home out there. Things were simple. It's a good medium to get one's head clear, to know oneself. It was an almost religious experience, said Pete Coulda Woulda Shoulda Susie. You feel like you really are a part of nature. I wouldn't have known I could have that deep and emotional feeling without having taken a long hike. I wouldn't have understood why it's important to preserve the wilderness. You don't have much to think about except what to eat and where to sleep, said Connor, Carolina Cooker's coward. You explore a lot about yourself. You sort out what's important and what's not. I'm 28 now, and I have less stuff now than when I moved away from home. There aren't a lot of people that can say that. It was just a really incredible experience in growing up. Jimmy B. Bodmer, was doing a 34-mile day into Damascus with two friends, Pollister and Archer. They stopped at a shelter at dusk for dinner and then did the last short stretch in the dark. As we got to Damascus, I'd been singing, "I See the Light," Jim said. Up ahead, we could just make out the lights in the valley where Damascus is, and I said, "I see the light." Just then, a bolt of lightning struck nearby. I could feel the electricity. Pollister turned to me and said, "Jim, don't do that again." Hiker after hiker says that on the trail there are no coincidences. They point to Gene Espy running into Earl Schaefer on his 1965 thru-hike, or Pete Susie hurting his ankle, hiking slower, and then marrying his new trail companion, Aletta Vaughan. Trail magic, they would call it. You're in trouble and help unexpectedly arrives, or you run into a friend in the middle of nowhere, or you're watching the evening news for the first time in months and there's a segment on the AT and you decide to hike the trail. Trail magic. On Albie Pogrub's third thru-hike, Gene Cashin, Dave Sherman, Ron Tipton and Ed Garvey surprised him with a formal birthday party at the Blackburn Centre in Northern Virginia. Albie's hiking partner, Pete Susie, remembers it was a big spread, with long tables and really formal-looking tablecloths and settings. Ron was standing in the trail with a napkin on his arm and menus, looking like a waiter. By sheer coincidence, Albie's parents and sister had dropped in at Harper's Ferry that day while driving home from Florida. Gene said, "Wow, we're having a party tonight," Albie recalled. Frank the Hawk Logue had once talked to a college roommate's father about a hike in the AT. Then, in February 1987, he ran into him again. In that very day's mail was a National Geographic with an article on the AT. He talked it over with his wife, Victoria, the Dove, and they decided to do the trail the following year. Coincidences frequently plant the idea of a thru-hike. Len Gearhead Olson was a mechanic when he spotted an AT sticker on a car and asked the driver what it was for. The driver, Jim Patilla, the father of a 2,000-miler, piqued Len's interest in the trail. Gene Cashin often hears people say they watched the evening news for the first time in months, caught a story on Bill Irwin hiking the trail and decided to do it. Or they just happened to see an article in a newspaper or an AT road sign. Charlie, Glove Kid, Gilbert, left for the trail in 1977, soon after his mother died of leukemia and his girlfriend dumped him. "I spent more than one night on the trail in tears as I fell asleep," he said. "It was a spiritual and mental challenge and intensely personal. It's like it all happened last year. It never goes away. It was a deeply spiritual experience for me. I got into poetry and reading more. I found if you put the past behind you, what's in front can be a lot richer." The AT really opened the door to me as a way out of mediocrity. It was a way to get out of my system some of the vinegar and pent-up frustrations that a young guy builds up. I was never typecast as being able to do anything like that. I wanted to stand out. And then when I was done, I didn't want to stand out. Afterwards, he decided to try out for the Olympic rowing team. Without coaching or technical training, he nearly qualified. One thing that came to me through hiking, if you want something, you can go get it. It's a great place to go to find the meaning of life for yourself. The trail's great, but you're not going to get any great reward at the end. So you're going to walk 2,000 miles. Big deal. It will just help settle something inside that's missing. Profile. Sonny Light Eagle Shames. I first saw Sonny, an interpretive ranger at Amicalola Falls, standing by a parked pickup truck, and I recognised her immediately from the descriptions I'd gotten. A few days later, I attended a unique show, a one-woman, hour-long dramatisation of a 1988 thru-hike. Maybe it was just a good audience at the Dahlonega ATC meeting, but most appeared spellbound by her accounts of how she learned which items to cull from a too-heavy pack and of a serious brush with hypothermia. Those few people tempted to doze off sprang to life when Sonny produced a snake and started waving it around. Wide awake myself, I chatted with her after the show. It's a unique combination for a thru-hiker. Part actress, part ranger naturalist, and part Indian mountain philosopher. Whatever else she is, Sonny Light Eagle Shames stands out among introverted thru-hikers as a polished, engaging performer with a delightfully different way of looking at the world. Like many thru-hikers, Sonny began her trip at a transition point in her life. After a decade as a hospital administrator in Atlanta, she quit to try to fill what was missing in her life. After finding several AT books at the library, she decided on a thru-hike. She spent several years researching and planning her 1988 trip. To accustom herself to hiking, she'd go to Amicalola on weekends and hike up Springer Mountain. On her first trip, she rested by a stream and thought that one day she would work there. On a thru-hike, she helped a ranger at Mount Greylock, Massachusetts, give a program. She thought it was neat that someone could actually do that for a living. After a thru-hike, she moved from Atlanta to the North Georgia mountains and quickly took a summer job as a naturalist at Amicalola and teaching environmental education at a nearby camp. She's been part of the North Georgia mountains ever since. When she climbed Springer to start a thru-hike, Sonny was full of excitement and doubts. "This is the day," she said. "Can I do this?" She had told everybody, "I'll hike as far as I can." In the Great Smoky Mountains, Sonny came upon an old woman who, wearing a dress, seemed out of place. The woman asked Sonny if she had seen the flowers. Sonny said no, she'd been looking at the hemlocks as she hurried along. The woman took her to see some beautiful flowers. Sonny looked into the woman's eyes and saw the sweet, gentle manner of a Cherokee grandmother. The lesson Sonny took from it was that she should slow down and learn to appreciate the natural world around her. From then on, her trek became a classic combination of thru-hiking, interesting side trips, and fascinating encounters with people. By Virginia, the physical challenge was over. What remained was the mental challenge, mind over matter. "I sort of figured out life in general," she said. "The more I carry in the backpack, the less I enjoy the trail." By Shenandoah, she was lonely, with few thru-hikers nearby. "I started to look at nature a little more closely," she said. She arrived in New Hampshire at the peak of autumn. She walked slowly, absorbing everything. "The spirit's going to get me to Maine," she thought. "I get to see the seasons change, but I've changed too. Nature has opened her heart to me. Time has passed ever so quickly since spring. I've been on the wings of an eagle that soared." Her most memorable encounters on the trip started in Tennessee. At a road crossing one Sunday evening, she spotted a church. She dropped by to see if they were having services. She looked forward to the singing and companionship and the chance to meet mountain people. A deacon welcomed her, and the minister announced her presence. Afterwards, everyone greeted her and thanked her for coming. The organist, a woman named Jean, put her up for the night and made biscuits with fresh apple butter for breakfast. Farther in Tennessee, Sonny descended the steep slope to Devil Fork Gap along the narrow path framed by two barbed wire fences. Ignoring the safety warning to not loiter at road crossings, she sat under a big oak tree on a beautiful day, the Saturday before Mother's Day, eating a peanut butter sandwich for lunch. Several cars stopped nearby, with 7 young men and a lone woman. They were drinking. Quickly, Sonny had qualms about her choice of a rest stop. They asked Sonny what she was doing, and she asked them a few questions. Finally, she asked if there was a telephone nearby to call her mother for the holiday. They told her they'd take her to Aunt Minnie's house, right down the road. When they got to the house, Aunt Minnie, an old lady, was making peanut butter cookies. As Sonny made a Mother's Day telephone call, Aunt Minnie plied her with homemade cookies and cold, fresh milk. The others went to a store and got beer and hot dogs and hamburgers for a barbecue. With a backpack loaded with beer and barbecued meat, Sonny hiked 5 more miles to the next shelter where her trail friends were growing concerned about her. She finally arrived at the shelter at 10 p.m. "I'm going, man, my backpack is so heavy. I need help," Sonny said. So they came out of their sleeping bags, picked up the backpack, and out rolled all the beer. Sonny gave them the barbecued meat too. We had a great time at the shelter that night. She met Trapper John in Monson, Maine. He showed her his trapline and took her on a bear hunt. It was moose hunting season, and they went to a checking station. He took her in his Indian-made birch canoe down the Allagash River. "If I had a measurement of time saying I have to get back on the trail, I would have missed that," Sonny said. When I started to hike on the trail, each day became longer and longer because there was no time element. So long as I get my food, so long as I have my necessities, that's all I need. And I've learnt that here in life today, so long as I have the necessities of life, everything's fine. Sony said as she went along, she could feel personal growth. I needed the sunlight to nurture me to grow. I needed the rain to grow, the cold, the heat to nurture me to grow. In the woods, I felt like a seedling nurtured by nature to grow. Sony, with a touch of wistfulness, passes on her ideas to the new crop of hikers travelling through Amicalola each spring. She sees them and thinks, I wish I could go with you, maybe another time. But with that flow of hikers, I also receive that energy and give out that energy. They're going on a journey, and I may sit and talk to them to say, hey, take your time. There's a lot out there to see if you have no limitations on your time. The trail is what you make it. There's no right or wrong in doing the trail. People have a lot of impressions, like it's wrong if I go on a blue blaze. But if you go on a blue blaze, you'll see something that no one else will see. So blue blazing, by all means, is not bad. Take the time to explore. What makes it so special is seeing the people, the Appalachian people. Go a bit deeper. Go to the church on Sunday that's a little out of the way. Now, as a ranger at Amicalola, Sony herself can be a guardian angel for hikers. In 1992, on Springer Mountain, she met a hiker named Charles, who badly wanted to do the AT even though he'd never hiked before. On a cold February day, Sony took Charles home, out of the severe weather. Charles, wearing blue jeans, was soaked. In the car, Charles said, Sony, I want to hike the trail. Can you help me? Well, go through your backpack and see what you have, she said. It turned out that Charles was carrying 30 little Bibles. He was planning on leaving one at each shelter. Well, that's great, Charles, says Sony. That's very spiritual of you, but that's also a lot of weight. Next they found that Charles had 50 beanie weenie cans. Sony said, Charles, you know you can have mail drops and send these ahead. You don't need to carry all this weight. Charles said, well, I didn't plan. I just wanted to hike the trail. I'd heard about the trail and I came. He was also carrying a hammer, pliers, screwdriver and a few nails. He was planning to build a travois and carry his backpack on it like a horse would. Sony took him to a store and helped him buy proper outdoor clothing. He took her advice and replaced his loafers with hiking boots. 5 days later, she got a call from a ranger at Camp Merrill saying that Charles was hurt. She put him on a bus home, but his spirit was, I'm going to hike the trail. Sony puts on dramatizations of a thru hike for various groups, including Elder Hostel. Her audience consists mostly of people who may have wanted to hike the AT, but never did. But when I'm interacting with those people, said Sony, I'm seeing inside their eyes that, yes, they're hiking this trail. Maybe their body no longer can walk, or they don't have the energy, but their spirit definitely has walked the trail when the program's finished. And I asked myself, is that my purpose in being here at the park? Is that my teaching? Our life here on earth is what we make it to be. The backpack that I carry on my back, I can put 60 pounds in it. I can put 90 pounds if I wish to. But the more I put in, the more problems I'm going to have. Do I wish to have problems? Or do I wish to have it a little bit easier so I can move around a little bit easier? All we need are the necessities in life: shelter, food, water. The programs that I put on are to remind people why they are here.